The desert sun had a cruel way of burning the world into silence. By late afternoon, when the wind died and the shadows grew long across the canyon floor, even the cicadas stopped their endless hum. Dust clung to everything, the rocks, the horses, the men, and the air itself shimmered as though it were trying to hide what was coming. Out beyond the ridges, a lone rider approached the small settlement of Dry Creek, his silhouette rippling in the heat waves. His horse moved slow, tired, its flanks dark with sweat. The man's hat was low, his shirt torn and dusty, and across his back hung a rifle that had seen more than its fair share of trouble. Dry Creek wasn't much of a town, just a handful of weather-beaten shacks, a saloon with a leaning porch, and a church whose bell hadn't rung in weeks. Folks there lived quiet, hard lives, raising cattle, tending small gardens, and praying the railroad might one day remember them. Trouble didn't come often, and when it did, it usually came on horseback. That's why the sight of the stranger rolling in from the south drew eyes from every porch and window. Inside the saloon, a piano man stopped mid-tune, letting the keys echo one last time before fading into the hot air. Men shifted in their chairs, watching through the dust-fogged glass. The barkeep, a heavy-set fellow with a rag always on his shoulder, set down the bottle he'd been polishing and nodded toward the door. "Another drifter," he muttered. "Looks like he's been through hell." The stranger pushed through the door, his boots leaving prints in the sand-caked floor. He didn't speak at first, just let his eyes sweep the room. He looked part white, part Apache. His skin sun-darkened, his hair long, tied back with a leather strip. There was something in his stare, something sharp, like he could see right through a man's soul and find the truth hiding there. When he finally spoke, his voice carried low but clear, the kind that made everyone stop pretending they weren't listening. "Whiskey," he said, his tone dry as the land outside. "And keep the glass clean." The barkeep poured him a drink without a word. No one asked his name, but they all wondered the same thing. What business did an Apache have riding alone into a dying town like Dry Creek? Outside, the wind had begun to shift. It carried the scent of rain, though the sky was empty and red as rust. The stranger drank slow, his eyes on the door. Then it opened again. A woman stepped in. She wasn't dressed like the usual rancher's wife or town girl. Her clothes were travel-worn, dusty but proper, her boots scuffed, her gloves thin from long days on the trail. She looked around the room, eyes landing on the stranger before anyone else. There was something desperate in her face, fear mixed with fire. "You," she said softly, her voice trembling but firm. "You're the one they call the half-blood from the Red Mesa?" The saloon fell quiet again. The stranger turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. "Maybe," he said. "Depends who's asking." "I need your help," she said. "My brother's been taken, out near the ridge. They said Apaches took him." A few men chuckled under their breath. One of them, a broad ranch hand with a crooked smile, leaned back in his chair. "Ma'am," he said, "if Apaches took your kin, you won't be needin' help. You'll be needin' a preacher." But the woman didn't flinch. "I heard you used to ride with them," she said to the stranger. "You know their ways. You know how to find them." For a moment, the man didn't move. Then he finished his drink and set the glass down slow. His dark eyes lifted to hers. "You don't know what you're asking," he said. "Those hills don't forgive trespassers." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she replied. "I'm asking for a chance." A tense silence settled over the room. Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering dust across the porch. Finally, the stranger pushed himself up, adjusted the worn strap of his rifle, and walked toward her. When he reached the doorway, he stopped and looked back at the room full of wary faces. "If I don't come back," he said, "you can tell the preacher to ring that bell again." Then he stepped out into the dying light. The woman close behind. They rode out past the edge of town, where the ground broke into shallow canyons and dry riverbeds. The land seemed endless, empty, echoing with secrets. The woman rode in silence for a while, watching the man ahead of her, the way he moved with the land, how his horse seemed to know every rise and dip in the trail. Finally, she spoke. "They said you were dangerous," she said. He didn't look back. "They're right. Then why help me?" He slowed his horse just enough to meet her gaze. "Didn't say I was helping you," he replied. "Said I'd ride with you. That's all." The sun dipped low behind the hills, setting the sky on fire. Shadows stretched long across the desert floor. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried. By the time they made camp near a cluster of red boulders, night had settled deep and quiet. The stranger built a small fire, his movements steady, unhurried. The woman sat across from him, her face lit by the flicker of flame. She watched him carefully, as though trying to read what kind of man he truly was. "You don't trust me," he said without looking up. "Should I?" she asked. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Trust gets people killed out here." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks into the night. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rumbled faintly, though no storm had yet come. The woman drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, uneasy. "Tell me something," she said. "If those Apaches still remember you, will they let you speak to them?" The man's eyes lifted from the fire, dark and unreadable. "They'll remember," he said quietly. "But that don't mean they'll listen." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, from the darkness beyond the firelight, a faint rustle echoed, a sound too heavy to be the wind. The horses shifted uneasily. The stranger rose in one smooth motion, hand on his rifle. "Stay close," he murmured. The woman looked into the dark, her heart pounding. The night seemed to breathe around them. Then a voice came from the shadows, deep and slow, with a rough edge that sent a chill down her spine. "Save your breath, sweetheart," the voice drawled. "You'll need it when the night gets wild." The woman froze. The stranger didn't move, his rifle aimed toward the sound. Then from the darkness stepped three men, faces painted, eyes gleaming in the firelight. They were Apaches, silent and sure-footed, their presence as natural as the land itself. The stranger lowered his rifle slightly, but tension rippled through his stance. The one who had spoken, a tall warrior with feathers braided in his hair, smiled faintly. "You've been gone a long time, brother," he said. "Now you ride with white eyes?" "I ride with whoever's got a reason," the stranger said evenly. The warrior's gaze shifted to the woman, studying her like she was a creature from another world. "And what reason does this one have?" he asked. Before she could answer, the thunder rolled again, closer this time, and the first drops of rain began to fall, hissing as they hit the fire. The flames sputtered and died, leaving them in half-darkness. The woman's voice trembled. "I just want my brother back." The Apache warrior's smile faded. He looked from her to the stranger, then toward the dark hills beyond. "If he's where I think he is," he said quietly, "you won't like what you find." The wind howled through the canyon, and lightning split the sky, revealing the vast, jagged land that seemed to swallow all hope whole. The stranger turned toward it, his expression unreadable, and then back to the woman, who was staring into the dark with wide, frightened eyes. "Too late to turn back now," he said, his voice low, and as the rain began to fall harder, drowning the last of the firelight, she realized that whatever truth waited out there in the night, it wasn't just about her brother. It was something far bigger and far more dangerous than she could have imagined. Rain fell steady through the canyon, the kind that soaked a man to his bones and made the desert smell alive for the first time in months. The woman pulled her shawl tighter, shivering as lightning flashed again, lighting up the faces around her. The three Apache men stood like shadows carved from stone, their dark eyes glinting under the wet sky. The one who had spoken, the tall warrior, kept his gaze fixed on the stranger, and the air between them carried a weight that words couldn't touch. The stranger, half Apache, half white, didn't flinch. His face was calm, though the woman could see his jaw tighten. "We need safe passage," he said finally. "We're headed toward Red Mesa." At the mention of that place, the warrior's expression darkened. "Red Mesa belongs to no one now," he said. "Only ghosts live there." The woman looked from one man to the other, confused and afraid. "My brother's out there," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "I don't care about ghosts." The warrior stepped closer, studying her face like he was trying to find the truth hiding in her words. "You don't understand what you're asking," he said. "That land isn't just dangerous, it's cursed by blood." Lightning cracked again, and for a moment the canyon walls glowed red. The stranger took a slow breath. "Then maybe that's where we'll find answers," he said. The warrior stared at him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "At dawn," he said, "we ride together. But if what you seek brings death to my people, your blood will join theirs." With that, the three Apaches turned and melted back into the darkness, leaving the stranger and the woman alone beside the dying fire. The woman sank down on a rock, trembling from cold and fear. The rain had soaked through her clothes and her hair clung to her face. "What did he mean?" she asked softly. "Cursed by blood?" The stranger crouched beside the fire, stirring the embers with a stick. "Red Mesa's old land," he said quietly. "Used to be Apache ground before the army came through. A battle happened there years back. The kind where no one walks away the same. Was it your people?" she asked. He looked up at her, his eyes dark under the brim of his wet hat. "Both sides lost something," he said. "Some still think the land remembers. Others just stay away." The woman's voice softened. "And you?" He didn't answer right away. The rain hissed as it hit the last sparks of the fire. "I remember enough," he said finally. "That's why I left." She watched him for a long time, her fear slowly mixing with curiosity. There was something about him, something lonely and hard but not cruel. She could see the lines of old pain written across his face, the kind of pain that doesn't fade with time. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The desert steamed under the rising sun, and mist clung to the low ground. The three Apache men returned, silent and alert, their horses restless beneath them. The woman mounted her own, still weak from the night's chill, but her eyes burned with determination. As they rode out, the land changed. The canyons grew deeper, the air heavier. Bones of old trees jutted from the ground, and the wind whistled through cracks in the stone. The stranger rode ahead, scanning every ridge, his hand never far from his rifle. The woman followed close, her heart pounding with every mile. They stopped by midday to rest near a dried riverbed. One of the Apaches, the youngest with a scar across his cheek, watched the woman carefully as she knelt to fill her canteen. He didn't speak much English, but his tone carried curiosity when he finally asked, "Why you risk your life for one man?" She looked up, startled. "He's my brother," she said. "He's all I've got left." The young warrior nodded slowly, but there was something in his eyes that told her he didn't understand, or maybe didn't believe. The stranger returned with a handful of dry brush, his voice low. "Don't answer too much," he told her quietly. "They're testing you." "Testing me?" she asked. "They want to see if you're worth trusting," he said. "Out here, words can be as dangerous as bullets." She glanced at the young warrior again who was still watching her. "Do they trust you?" she asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "They remember me," he said. "That's not the same." They moved again before the sun dipped too low. The path narrowed through the cliffs, forcing them to ride single file. The air grew still, too still, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The stranger slowed his horse, scanning the ground. "Tracks," he murmured. "Fresh ones." The Apaches dismounted, crouching low to study the dirt. The tall warrior pointed toward the north ridge. "3 horses," he said. One with a limp. The woman's heart jumped. "That's them," she said. "My brother's horse. He hurt his leg before he was taken." The warrior rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "Then he rides with men who don't belong here. What do you mean?" she asked. "Not Apache," he said. "White men." The stranger's face hardened. "Bounty hunters," he said. "Or worse." The woman felt her stomach twist. "Why would they take him?" He looked out toward the horizon, where Red Mesa loomed faint and red beneath the setting sun. "Sometimes folks go missing for what they know," he said. "Or what they saw." They pressed on until the sky turned violet and the air cooled. They made camp beneath a rocky overhang, where the land opened into a wide plain. From there, they could see the dark shape of Red Mesa rising in the distance like an old wound. The woman sat by the fire, staring at it, while the men spoke quietly in Apache. After a while, she turned to the stranger. "You said you left," she said. "Why come back now?" He was silent for a moment, watching the flames dance. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "the past don't stay buried. You can run from it, but it always finds its way back." She studied him, her voice quiet. "You sound like someone who's lost a lot." He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just weariness. It was sorrow. "I lost everything that made me both," he said. "The white folks never saw me as one of theirs, and the Apaches stopped calling me brother the day I rode away." The firelight flickered across his face, tracing the lines of memory and regret. The woman didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. The night grew colder. Coyotes cried in the distance. The Apaches kept watch in turns, and the woman finally drifted into uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with flashes of fire, thunder, and the sound of a man calling her name. Before dawn, she woke to find the stranger already standing, looking out toward Red Mesa. The wind had changed. It was dry again, sharp with the smell of dust. "They're close," he said. "I can feel it." The Apaches broke camp quickly. The ride toward the mesa was rough, the ground cracked and uneven. By the time they reached the edge, the sun was up, washing the land in harsh light. The woman shaded her eyes, peering down into the valley. There, among the rocks, she saw movement.
3 horses.
A small fire, and beside it a man tied to a post. Her breath caught. "It's him," she whispered. "It's my brother." The stranger studied the scene through his scope, his brow furrowing. "Something's off," he said. "They're too exposed." The tall Apache warrior nodded. "It's bait," he said. "Bait?" she asked, panicked. "For what?" "For us," the stranger said quietly. "They knew we'd come." Before anyone could move, a sharp crack split the air, a rifle shot. The bullet struck the ground inches from the woman's feet, sending up a puff of dust. She froze. The stranger grabbed her arm, pulling her down behind a rock. "Stay low," he hissed. The Apache scattered, moving like shadows through the brush. More shots rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. The air filled with smoke and sand. The woman clutched the stranger's arm. "What do we do?" she whispered. He glanced over the rock, his jaw set. "We make them think we're running," he said. "Then we turn the hunt around." She stared at him, fear and trust warring in her chest. "And if they don't fall for it?" He looked back at her, his eyes steady. "Then we fight," he said. "Because if we don't, no one leaves this canyon alive." The woman swallowed hard, her heart hammering as the wind carried the sound of horses closing in. The stranger's hand tightened around his rifle, his eyes narrowing on the dust rising from the ridge. And as the first riders came into view, she realized that this wasn't just about her brother anymore. It was about something much deeper, something buried in the red earth that refused to stay hidden. The past had come riding for them, and it wasn't coming to talk. Gunfire cracked through the dry morning air, echoing against the canyon walls like thunder. The woman could barely breathe. Dust and smoke hung thick around her, stinging her eyes and throat. The stranger crouched low beside her, his rifle steady, his movements quick but calm. The Apaches had scattered into the rocks, their dark shapes moving fast and silent as ghosts, firing from hidden angles. Whoever had set the trap below wasn't expecting that kind of resistance. "Keep your head down," the stranger muttered, pulling her closer behind the stone ledge. "They've got the higher ground, but not for long." She nodded, clutching the small pistol he'd handed her earlier, her hands trembling. Below them she could see flashes of movement, men in worn coats, their hats low, rifles glinting in the sun. They weren't soldiers, but they moved like men who'd seen war. One of them shouted something, his voice rough, angry, full of confidence. The woman couldn't make out the words, but she felt the threat in his tone. Then another shot rang out, and a chunk of rock exploded near her shoulder. The stranger fired back once, twice, each shot clean and measured. Then he ducked again, reloading. "They've got at least 6 down there," he said quietly. "Maybe more behind the ridge. Can we reach my brother?" she whispered. He shook his head. "Not yet. They're using him to keep us pinned." She looked down again, her heart aching. Her brother's body was slumped against the post, his head hanging low. She couldn't tell if he was alive. The sight of him like that nearly broke her, but she forced herself to stay still. The Apaches moved in a wide arc, slipping through the rocks, circling closer. The tall warrior from the night before gave a low whistle, a signal the stranger recognized immediately. "They're flanking," he said. "We've got to move now before they're boxed in." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a narrow path that wound along the ridge. The ground was loose and steep, each step sending pebbles tumbling into the canyon below. Behind them, the sound of gunfire grew louder, mixed with the sharp cries of battle. As they climbed higher, the woman's mind raced. Every breath burned her lungs, but she didn't slow down. She kept glancing at the stranger, wondering who he really was beneath that calm, guarded face. He didn't talk much, but every time he looked out across the land, there was a weight in his eyes, like he'd seen all this before and had come to expect nothing but pain from it. When they reached the top, he stopped and crouched low, peering down into the valley. From here, the whole scene spread out before them. The fire pit, the tied man, the ambushers now pinned between 2 sides. The Apaches had taken to the rocks, their rifles picking off the enemy with precision. The sound of horses echoed faintly from the east. "There's more coming," he said grimly. "They've got riders in reserve. Can't we just leave?" she asked, her voice shaking. He turned to her, his expression firm but not unkind. "You came for your brother," he said. "If we ride away now, he dies for sure." She swallowed hard, nodding. Her fear didn't matter anymore, not when someone she loved was out there waiting for her. The stranger raised his rifle again and aimed carefully. One of the ambushers went down. Another tried to run for cover but was caught by a shot from the tall Apache warrior. The gunfire began to fade, replaced by the sounds of retreat, Men shouting, horses spooked, boots scrambling over stone. Then came silence. The woman didn't wait. She scrambled down the slope before anyone could stop her, her heart pounding so loud she could hardly hear her own footsteps. The stranger called after her, but she didn't slow. When she reached the bottom, she ran straight to her brother. His skin was pale, lips dry, but when she touched his face, his eyes fluttered open. "Lila?" he whispered weakly. She let out a sob of relief. "It's me," she said. "You're going to be all right." Before she could untie him, the stranger appeared beside her, scanning the area. "We're not safe yet," he said. "They'll regroup." The Apaches joined them soon after, moving quietly through the clearing. The tall warrior knelt beside one of the fallen ambushers, turning the man's coat to reveal a brass badge pinned inside. "Bounty men," he said darkly. "From Santa Fe," the stranger frowned. "Bounty for what?" The warrior shrugged. "For her brother, maybe. Or for you." The woman looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" The stranger didn't answer. His gaze had gone distant, lost in thought. Something about this wasn't adding up. He'd seen bounty hunters before, men paid to chase bandits, outlaws, anyone the law wanted gone. But these men had been too organized, too quiet. They weren't chasing a reward. They were covering something up. They left the clearing quickly, taking her brother with them on horseback. He was weak but conscious, clinging to his sister as the group moved through the canyons. The Apaches led the way, following trails invisible to anyone else. The stranger rode behind, his eyes on the horizon, his mind turning over old memories. By nightfall, they reached a hidden camp in a narrow pass, sheltered by cliffs and shadow. The woman helped her brother to rest near the fire while the others kept watch. The stranger stood apart from them, silent, his expression unreadable. After a while, the tall warrior approached him. "You know why they're here," he said. "You've known since we found them." The stranger's jaw tightened. "Maybe," he said. The warrior crossed his arms. "Then speak. If danger comes to my people again because of you, I need to know." The stranger met his gaze. "The men who attacked us weren't after her brother," he said. "They were after a map, a piece of something that leads back to the Red Mesa massacre. I think her brother stumbled onto it," the warrior frowned. "The soldiers took everything after that battle." "What map?" "Not a paper one," the stranger said. "Something carved into stone. An old trail marker, maybe. But if they're hunting for it now, it means someone's trying to hide what happened there." The woman, overhearing from the fire, turned toward them. "What happened there?" she asked softly. The warrior's eyes darkened. "A massacre," he said. "Your army came for us, burned the camps, took prisoners. Many never returned. The land was soaked in blood. That's why no one goes there now." Her brother stirred, his voice weak but clear. "I found bones," he whispered. "A whole pit of them, out by the red cliffs. And carvings, names, dates. One said the soldiers were ordered to wipe them out." The stranger's expression hardened. "That's why they want him dead," he said. He found proof. Silence hung over the camp. The wind howled through the cliffs and the firelight flickered across the weary faces. The woman reached for her brother's hand, her voice trembling. "So they'll come again?" "They won't stop," the stranger said quietly. "Not until the past is buried for good." The tall warrior looked toward the east, where the dark outline of Red Mesa loomed faintly under the stars. "Then the truth still sleeps there," he said. "And if we don't face it, it will find us first." As the night deepened, unease settled over the camp. Every whisper of wind sounded like footsteps. The horses shifted nervously, sensing what the humans could not. The woman couldn't sleep. She kept watching the stranger by the fire, the way he stared into the flames, lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "You said you remembered that place. Were you there?" He didn't answer at first. Then slowly he nodded. "I was a boy," he said. "My mother was Apache. My father rode with the army. When the fighting started, I didn't belong to either side. I survived because both forgot me." She looked at him with new understanding. "And now you're going back," she said. He nodded again. "Because it's time someone did." Before dawn, they packed their things. The air was still, heavy with the scent of sage. The sky in the east had just begun to pale when the first sound of hooves echoed in the distance. The stranger froze, tilting his head. "They found us," he said. The woman felt her heart sink. The Apaches moved quickly, dousing the fire, readying their rifles. The stranger turned to her, his voice firm but low. "Take your brother and stay close. No matter what happens, don't run blind. The desert hides more than men." Then the sound grew louder, dozens of riders, maybe more. Dust rose on the far ridge. The woman clutched her brother's arm, her pulse racing. The stranger mounted his horse, his rifle gleaming faintly in the morning light. The tall Apache warrior rode beside him, his expression grim. "They're coming in from both sides," the warrior said. The stranger nodded. "Then we hold the middle." And as the first riders appeared on the ridge, dark shapes against the red dawn, the woman realized that the fight they were walking into wasn't just about survival. It was about truth, the kind that never stays buried, no matter how many try to silence it. The wind rose, carrying the scent of rain again, and for a moment, the world held still, caught between the storm that was coming and the ghosts that had never left. The sun climbed higher, burning through the thin morning haze as the riders approached the narrow canyon pass. The woman clutched her brother's hand tightly, feeling the tremor of fear in both of them. Her brother was weak, but he stayed upright, leaning on her for support. Every muscle in her body was tense, every nerve alert. The stranger rode a few paces ahead, rifle in hand, his eyes scanning the horizon, noting every ridge, every shadow, every movement. The Apaches moved with uncanny quiet, their dark shapes blending with the rocks and scrub. Even the wind seemed to hesitate around them, carrying no sound but the soft creak of leather and the faint scrape of hooves. The woman could sense their confidence, the way they didn't flinch at the distant riders. But she was too human to stop feeling the fear that knotted her stomach. She knew the men coming weren't ordinary bounty hunters. They were organized, ruthless, and they were closing in fast. "Keep your eyes open," the stranger muttered, his voice low. "They'll test our lines first. Watch for movement in the rocks, not the dirt. The quiet ones are the deadliest." Her heart pounded as she followed his lead, keeping low in the saddle. The Apaches split into two flanks, moving to positions the woman couldn't fully understand, surrounding the narrow path like predators. She kept her brother close, whispering to calm him. "Do you remember the carvings?" she asked him quietly. He nodded weakly. "Names, dates. A list of people the army said were gone," he said. "I saw it all. They wanted to erase it." The woman shivered, realizing the weight of what they carried. Her brother wasn't just a missing boy. He was proof. Proof that something dark, buried for decades, was still alive in the desert. A sudden whistle cut through the canyon, sharp and high. The stranger froze, signaling for the group to stop. He crouched low on his horse, eyes narrowing at the ridge above them. Through the heat shimmer, the distant riders were slowing, fanning out, testing the canyon walls for ambushes. The first shots rang out, deliberate, aimed at the rocks, meant to flush out anyone hiding. The woman's brother flinched. "Are we going to die?" he whispered. "Not if we're smart," she said, though her voice was barely more than a breath. The stranger raised his rifle, firing a single shot that cut across the canyon with uncanny precision. One of the attackers fell from his horse, a violent jerk, then silence. The remaining riders hesitated. The woman saw the fear flash in their eyes, the realization that they were not facing ordinary people. "They think this is easy," the tall Apache warrior muttered, his voice like gravel. "They'll learn." The woman felt the tension coil tighter in her chest. Every second stretched into eternity. The attackers were circling closer, taking the high ground, trying to pin them into the canyon. Dust swirled in the wind, stinging her eyes, making every sound muffled but more intense. She couldn't see everything, but she could feel it. The weight of eyes on them, the silent calculation of hunters deciding who would fall first. "Move," the stranger hissed suddenly. The group pressed forward along a narrow ledge, the canyon walls rising on either side. One wrong step meant death. The woman's legs burned with the strain of riding, her hands raw from gripping the reins. Behind her, the Apaches fired silently, picking off the slower attackers, their bullets finding gaps in armor, horse, and man alike. She looked down and saw the attackers faltering, their confidence shaken. But the canyon offered no easy escape. Every ridge, every rock could hide a rifle barrel, a trap, a man ready to end their lives. Her heart pounded as a sharp crack split the air. Another rider went down, thrown from his horse. The woman squeezed her brother's hand tighter, trying to keep him calm as the chaos swirled around them. One of the attackers broke from the main group, trying to flank them through a narrow crevice. The stranger spotted him immediately and fired, the man crashing into the rocks below. The woman gasped, the sound lost in the echoing canyon. The stranger didn't look back. There was no time for horror, no time for pity. Every second counted, and they were running out. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the faint scent of rain, of wet earth, and something else. Smoke. Far off, a small flare of dust rose, a signal, and the woman knew they weren't alone. The attackers had reinforcements. The canyon was becoming a trap, a place where the land itself seemed determined to crush anyone who dared pass through. "Stay close," the stranger muttered, leading them into a tighter section of the canyon. "We're almost at the ridge where the trail splits. Hold your nerve." The woman could see her brother's pale face, streaked with sweat and dust. His small hands were white from gripping the reins. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Me too," she said softly. "But we have to keep moving." They reached the split in the trail, a narrow ledge barely wide enough for two horses side by side. Below them, the canyon dropped sharply, the riverbed dry and littered with jagged rocks. The stranger signaled for the Apaches to take positions above and below the ledge. The tension was unbearable. Every rider approaching could bring an end to their lives, or to everything they were protecting. From above, a shadow moved, another group of attackers, careful and slow, testing the ledge. The stranger fired twice, the bullets snapping through the air. One rider went down, but two others pressed forward, guns aimed at the ledge. "Now!" the stranger shouted. The Apaches erupted from hiding spots, firing with precision. Horses reared, men screamed, the sound of gunfire bouncing off the rocks. The woman's brother stumbled on his horse, but she grabbed him, steadying him as the chaos consumed the canyon. She could see the attackers faltering, their formation broken, but there were too many, and they were still coming. Lightning flashed in the distance, though the sky was still mostly clear. The wind carried a faint rumble of thunder. The desert seemed to breathe around them, the rocks alive with the echoes of battle. She could feel it, the history, the blood, the land itself resisting them, as if the past was waking up to claim anyone who dared uncover it. The stranger swung his rifle toward the ridge above, firing rapidly. One of the attackers collapsed over the rocks. Another tried to rush forward, only to meet the sharp edge of an Apache blade. The woman's breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to hold her nerve. She had never seen battle like this, so fast, so deadly, so merciless. Her brother whispered again, "I don't think we can make it." "You will," she said fiercely, even though doubt gnawed at her. "We have to." The riders above them were regrouping. She could see the flash of rifles, the glint of steel, the determination in their eyes. They had numbers, but the Apaches had the terrain. And the stranger, he moved with a calm that was almost impossible, firing, calculating, moving like he was one step ahead of death itself. A sudden shot rang out from the right, and the woman felt the wind from a bullet passing dangerously close. Her horse bolted slightly, and she clutched the reins with all her strength. The stranger leapt to shield her, his body brushing hers as he fired again. Two more attackers falling into the canyon below. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them. Dust and smoke swirled, masking figures and movements. The woman's brother hung back slightly, fear making him hesitate. She grabbed his arm. "Come on, don't stop now." They pressed forward, the ledge narrowing, rocks jutting out like teeth. Another shot rang out, striking the ground near them, sending pebbles skittering. She looked up and saw two riders on the ridge preparing to charge down. The stranger muttered something under his breath, aimed, and fired. One went down, his horse sliding over the rocks. The other hesitated, and that gave the Apaches the opening they needed. They surged from the cliffs, overwhelming the remaining attackers, forcing them to retreat or die trying. For a brief moment, silence fell. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. The woman's body ached, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Her brother sat stiffly on his horse, wide-eyed, his lips pale, but the danger wasn't over. The distant dust clouds told her more riders were coming. From the ridge she could see men signaling, regrouping, preparing for another push. Her stomach dropped. The fight was far from finished. The stranger mounted again, scanning the horizon, calculating, silent and deadly. The tall Apache warrior leaned toward him. "They've brought more," he said quietly. The stranger nodded, his jaw tight. "We've bought time," he said, "but not enough." The woman gripped her brother's arm. "What do we do now?" she asked, voice trembling. "We survive," the stranger said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "And we make them pay for every step they take toward us." Lightning flashed again in the distance. The wind carried a faint metallic scent, the smell of blood, dust, and history. The canyon seemed to pulse with the tension, the danger, the weight of the past pressing down on them all. And as the next wave of riders crested the ridge, the woman realized with a cold certainty, they were standing at the edge of something far bigger than herself, her brother, or even the stranger. The fight wasn't just for survival. It was for the truth buried in the Red Mesa, a truth that would not stay hidden. The desert was alive. The past was awake, and the night that was coming promised fire, blood, and revelations that none of them were ready for. She drew a deep, shivering breath, clutching her brother close. Every nerve screamed at her. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound promised death, or worse. The stranger tightened his grip on his rifle, eyes hard as stone. The tall Apache warrior signaled silently. The Apaches spread like shadows through the rocks, ready to strike. The next moments would decide everything. The air hummed with anticipation. Every heartbeat was a countdown, and the canyon, ancient and unforgiving, waited for them to take the next step. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Every sound stretched taut across the air as the next wave of riders charged down the ridge. The stranger and the tall Apache warrior moved as one, their eyes scanning the terrain, their rifles steady. The woman held her brother close, keeping him low on his horse, trying not to think about how exposed they all were. Every muscle in her body screamed with tension, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay alive, to trust the stranger and the warriors who had become her unexpected guardians. Shots rang out again, echoing off the rock walls. The Apaches were everywhere at once, silent and deadly, emerging from the cliffs, firing and disappearing like shadows. The riders faltered, their charge breaking against the sudden, precise assault. Horses reared and screamed. Riders lost their balance, and one by one, the attackers were disarmed or forced to retreat down the canyon floor. The stranger moved like a force of nature, taking down anyone who dared come close. His eyes were sharp, focused, but there was a flicker of something behind them. Pain, memories, loss, but also determination. The woman watched him, realizing that his skill wasn't just survival instinct. It was the result of decades of navigating this harsh, unforgiving land. One rider attempted to flank them through a narrow crevice, but the tall Apache warrior anticipated it, stepping into the path and intercepting him with a swift strike that left the man stumbling into the rocks. The woman felt her pulse slow slightly as she realized the immediate danger had passed, but the distant dust clouds told her there were more on the way. The stranger motioned to the Apaches to gather quickly. "We need to move before the next wave finds us," he said. The woman helped her brother steady his horse, and they followed as the group pressed deeper into a narrower part of the canyon. Here the terrain favored them. The attackers couldn't ride two abreast, and the rocks offered cover at every turn. They rode for hours, the tension easing just enough for the woman to notice the quiet strength in her brother. He was pale and shaky, but he had survived, and she felt a surge of pride at his resilience. The stranger rode beside her, his gaze sweeping constantly for danger, but she could see the faintest signs of relief in his stance. They were still in danger, but for the first time the odds were beginning to feel manageable. By late afternoon, they reached a wide clearing where the red cliffs of Red Mesa rose like jagged teeth against the sky. The stranger dismounted, motioning for everyone to follow. "We're here," he said, voice low but steady. "The land holds the answers, and it's time we find them." The woman's brother looked around in awe and fear. "This is the place," he whispered. "This is where I saw them." "The bones, the carvings." The tall Apache warrior nodded gravely. "It's been waiting," he said. "Waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the truth." The stranger led them to a secluded cave at the base of the cliffs. Inside, the walls were etched with names, dates, and symbols, evidence of the massacre the Apaches had spoken of. The woman ran her fingers over the markings, a chill running down her spine. Her brother knelt beside her, tracing the carvings with shaking hands. "They tried to erase them," he said softly. "They wanted no one to remember." "But you remembered," the stranger said, his tone almost gentle. "You carried the proof here, through everything." The Apaches looked at the carvings, then at the siblings. "The land remembers," the tall warrior said. "It holds the truth that men try to hide, and now it belongs to you too." The woman felt tears stinging her eyes. The weight of fear, the tension, the long ride, and the fight all melted into something else. A sense of responsibility, of connection, of history reclaimed. She hugged her brother tightly, relief and pride coursing through her. "We need to leave this place soon," the stranger said, glancing toward the ridge. "The men who attacked us aren't gone. They'll come back, maybe with more, but at least now we know the truth, and we can carry it safely." The Apaches helped them navigate back down the canyon, choosing paths that offered cover and safety. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the desert. The woman felt the weight of exhaustion, but also a sense of accomplishment. They had survived, and more importantly, they had preserved the truth. As they neared the edge of the canyon where the land opened into open desert, the woman turned to the stranger. "Why did you help us?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "Because someone had to," he said. "Because you reminded me that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about protecting what matters: people, truth, the land itself." Her brother nodded weakly, a small smile on his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice still hoarse but filled with gratitude. The tall Apache warrior studied the stranger for a long moment, then nodded once. "You've done well," he said. "The land will remember your actions, just as it remembers the past." The woman looked back toward Red Mesa, the jagged cliffs glowing in the sunset. The bones and carvings, the blood and loss that had marked the land for decades, now felt like a part of her, a story she had been given to carry forward. She realized that survival was only part of life's test. Understanding, remembrance, and courage were what truly defined it. As they rode toward the safety of Dry Creek, the air grew cooler, the desert quiet once more. The wind carried the scent of sage and wet earth, a reminder that the land could heal, that even wounds buried in history could find some peace. The woman felt her brother lean against her shoulder, his weight light but grounding, a living reminder of why she had risked everything. The stranger rode a few paces ahead, scanning constantly, but there was a calm in his stance now, a sense that the immediate danger had passed. The Apaches flanked them, their eyes watchful, their presence reassuring. The canyon, which had held so much terror and tension, now felt like a protective cradle, a witness to their journey and their survival. By the time they reached the outskirts of Dry Creek, the town was quiet. A few townsfolk emerged from their homes, drawn by the sight of riders returning from the wilderness. They didn't understand everything that had happened, but they could see the relief, the weariness, and the determination on the faces of those who returned. The woman helped her brother down from his horse, letting him rest against her as the Apaches nodded their farewells. The tall warrior turned to the stranger. "The land will be safe now," he said. "For a time, but remember, history has a way of coming back." The stranger gave a slight nod, a shadow of a smile passing over his face. "I know," he said, "and I'll be ready if it does." The woman stood with her brother watching the sunset paint the red cliffs in gold and orange. She felt a profound sense of closure, even as she knew that life in the desert always held danger. But for now, the fight was over, the truth preserved, and the bonds they had formed stronger than any fear. Her brother looked up at her, eyes wide with awe. "We did it," he said softly. "Yes," she replied, brushing dust from his hair. "We survived, and now, the story lives on." The stranger rode off toward the horizon, a solitary figure moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived through much and carried it all forward. The Apaches melted back into the shadows of the canyon, their duty fulfilled, leaving the woman and her brother to the safety of their town. As night fell, Dry Creek seemed to breathe a little easier. The wind carried a gentle coolness, rustling the leaves and dry brush. The stars emerged, scattered across the sky like silver dust, shining over the desert that had witnessed bloodshed, courage, and survival. The woman looked up, taking it all in, feeling a quiet peace she hadn't known in weeks. She knew the journey had changed her, her brother, and even the stranger who had risked everything. They had faced death, history, and the ghosts of the past, and they had survived. But more than survival, they had reclaimed something that mattered: truth, justice, and the courage to face what others tried to hide. She held her brother's hand, looking out over the desert that had once felt so dangerous, so unforgiving. Now it felt alive, resilient, and full of stories waiting to be told. They would never forget the lessons learned, the bonds formed, or the land that had tested them so fiercely. And though the stranger had disappeared into the horizon, and the Apaches had returned to their secret paths, the woman understood that the spirit of the land, the echoes of the past, and the courage of those who stood for truth would stay with them forever. The desert, red and vast, held its secrets, but for the first time, the woman felt that some of those secrets were in safe hands. She and her brother walked back into Dry Creek, weary but alive, carrying the knowledge that they had faced history itself and come through it stronger. The canyon behind them was quiet now, but it would always remember, and so would they. And with that, they stepped into the town, into a future where fear no longer ruled, where survival had been won, and where courage and truth had finally prevailed. The desert night settled over Dry Creek, calm at last, but with the quiet understanding that the land would always watch, always remember, and always shape those brave enough to listen. And in that silence, the woman and her brother found the peace that had seemed impossible just days before, the knowledge that they had not only survived, but had honored the past and secured the future.